say that data shows, especially when you're having conversations with conservative constituencies, um, that if you present them if you present them with the option of decisions that are punitive, well, they're going to lean that way because
Mhm.
that's the only thing that's being offered. But if you offer conservatives policies that are either punitive or restorative, or that offer rehabilitation, they lean towards rehabilitation, restoration, and redemption. And so we know that the criminal justice system is not designed that way. It is designed to be punitive.
Mhm.
But I would argue that it's not just being tough on crime, it's being smart on crime.
Mhm.
And the death penalty is not smart public policy. And it's for the reasons that Adam just laid out. If I'm having a conversation with a conservative lawmaker, well, I'm going to have the conversations about the financial implications. And that is that it's more expensive to have a death penalty sentence than it is for someone to serve a sentence of, let's say, life without parole. And the reason for that is because you have to have a new jury, you have to have a new trial, and these systems and processes are not determined overnight. These takes years and decades. So um, the financial implications that are accrued over uh, X amount of time, well, that's very astronomical. And that's not in the economic interest of the state and or the nation. So it's important to have these conversations. I think it's important to also to meet people where they're at.
Mhm.
For many people, it's for me, it was the pro-life perspective. That's how it started, right? So the feeling compelled to have a holistic view of being pro-life, that started my journey of being against capital punishment. For others, like Adam pointed out, the probability of executing an innocent person. And I am someone, and there are many others, where faith is the core to who they are. And I'm reminded of a scripture in Proverbs 6 where it talks about the seven things that are abominable to the Lord. And one of them says, hands that shed innocent blood. Well, the quick default answer would be like, well, those are the ones who commit the crime. But that's not what it says. So that means if the state, if the government executes an innocent person, my faith tells me that that is an abomination, and that's not something that I'm comfortable living or that I'm comfortable endorsing. So there's the probability of executing an innocent person. It's the fact that we allow for government to arbitrarily pick and decide who lives and who dies. Um,
Mhm.
so for these reasons and more, um, these are the conversations that we need to have with lawmakers, with conservatives. And I would say this also. Another default answer is, well, what about the victims um, getting justice for them? And victims, just like any other group of people, are not monolithic. Of course, there are some who want the death penalty, but there's also a lot who don't. And the reason being is because all that does is recycle that pain and that trauma that they are exposed to. So what the death penalty does is it transfers pain from one family to another. And
Mhm.
that's just something that I'm not comfortable endorsing.
Yeah, and I kind of already touched on it, but I think the death penalty actually devalues innocent life. I don't think that if you really get down to the base level and you agree that we will never be able to guarantee we don't execute an innocent person because human beings administer this, created and administer the system. So the risk of killing an innocent person is an inherent part of the system, then you're making your peace with taking innocent life if you support the death penalty. So I think for those that argue that the death penalty is necessary to demonstrate the value of innocent life, I think you have to acknowledge that there is an inherent conflict in that statement.
Yeah, I agree. Great answers, guys. This time I'll start with you, Adam. If you were speaking directly to a lawmaker who identifies as pro-life but still supports the death penalty, what would be your main point of persuasion?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about it a little bit already, just kind of walking through those questions. First and foremost, that I wrestled with myself. So I'm not arguing with anybody. I'm sharing about my personal experience that I've had having to sit and make these decisions. So they might still disagree, but I'm not coming to the conversation in a way where I can be simply dismissed. You know, I did this for 3 years on behalf of the state. I reviewed tens of thousands of cases, and I voted on the lives of 5 other human beings. So on a certain level, like I'm not throwing that in their face. I'm just saying, if you have the time, I'd like to share with you why I believe what I believe today. So I think that approach is really important. But aside from the innocence question, I think the next point would be this is one of the most important decisions that a government can make about one of its citizens, whether or not they live or die. We trust the government with far less than that. So, as a conservative, you have to say what level of competency do you want your state to make one of the most important decisions that it can make? And in particular, in Oklahoma, our state has a terrible track record with carrying out executions with any level of competence. And we don't have time to go through all the examples, but for anybody familiar with this issue, you know how much Oklahoma has struggled with competently executing people. And so when I'm talking to a legislator, they know that right away. They know that whatever level of competency they would even be able to describe in that moment off the top of their head for capital punishment, the state of Oklahoma is not going to meet. So then we get to talk about, okay, well, we did the capital punishment study. We had a death penalty commission that was convened. They came up with a list of 46 recommendations. It was bipartisan. They met for a year and a half. And not a single one of those recommendations has been implemented since the commission finished almost 10 years ago. So even if you can inherently acknowledge they don't do it competently, then we can say practically, like we actually have already asked experts to gather and review Oklahoma's capital punishment system, and we haven't done any of that either. So even if you can pick your number and say how many innocent people you're okay with executing, you still have to describe how competently you want the government to do this. Otherwise, you're saying you don't really care how competently they do it, which most conservatives are not going to agree with. They're going to want to say, I think our government should be competent if we're going to do something like this. And then they realize no matter what the standard is, right now, Oklahoma is not meeting that standard.
Right. I think having a conversation with conservatives, um, first of all, we acknowledge that we have an inherent distrust of government. We're very skeptical of government because government has proven to be too vast, too inept, and too corrupt. And to bring this example, um, to make this example more relevant, well, let's look at the times we're currently living in. As we're having this conversation right now, the government is actually shut down. And why is the government shut down? Well, because they can't, as of right now, they can't come to terms on what it looks like to govern. And so if they can't come to terms on what it's like to govern on complex issues, why would we, and I say this absent of being hyperbolic, but why would we trust that same government to determine when one should live or die? So actually, what is happening right now before our eyes is antagonistic to conservative principles and values. So we believe in small and limited government. The death penalty, in my opinion, is the height of big government. We are authorizing state-sanctioned violence. We're authorizing the state to arbitrarily and unfairly administer, and this is something that um, I really want the members, those who are watching this webinar, to realize. And if you don't remember anything else I say, please remember this: the death penalty is the one punishment that is irreversible. Once it's administered, you can't say, "Oops, we made a mistake." You can't go back and rectify the problem. The act has been done. And so these are some of the things that I will want a lawmaker to grapple with while also respectfully meeting them where they're at.
Beautiful. Thank you. I think you guys both hit on some very important topics. We'll just slide right on to the next question. One of the core conservative principles is limited government. How does the death penalty conflict with that value? And I know you guys kind of answered some of that in your questions before, but if you just want to hone in on the limited government aspect, I really appreciate that. And we'll start with you this time, Demetrius.
Yeah, as I previously said, um, the death penalty, it allows for the government to pick and to decide who lives and who dies. It expands the size and the scope of government, and it gives government more power than what it should have. And so the questions that we need to grapple with is, do we trust the government as it is currently constructed? And let's think about this, Jasmine and Adam in the audience. Um, do we trust the government to deliver our mail on time? I think I can answer that. The answer is no. Do we trust the government to give us health insurance? I think I can answer that. The answer is no. Do we trust the government to tell us what's in the Epstein files? I think I can answer that. The answer is no. I'll be here all night giving examples of why we have reasons to be skeptical and to distrust the government. So if we want government to be small and limited, then we shouldn't do anything that's going to be antagonistic towards that. And the death penalty is the total opposite of small and limited. And the way that it's administered and its cost and how it is used, that is not small and limited government. It is not a conservative policy.
Thank you.
I think Demetrius answered it perfectly. I don't have anything to add to that one.
I agree. I think he hit all the points. Okay, well, piggybacking on that question about limited government, how does the lack of transparency around executions and lethal injection protocols affect the conservative case against the death penalty? And we'll start with you this time, Adam.
Yeah. I think in Oklahoma, we can use very specific examples and remind legislators the state that we find ourselves in today, which is recently having a case remanded by the U.S. Supreme Court for a gentleman who has had 3 last meals and 8 execution dates. This is the gentleman who was the second of 2 scheduled executions to happen in the same day. And the only reason he was not executed that day is because the execution prior to him, we realized that we had used the wrong drug. And it was only through that execution that we realized we had already used the wrong drug in a previous execution. And here we are today with our state's attorney general saying to the U.S. Supreme Court, essentially, please do not make us move forward with this. It was unprecedented for a state attorney general to request the U.S. Supreme Court to allow him to not move forward with the execution. And if we had had our way, if the state government of Oklahoma had had its way, he would have died 3 times already.
Um,
So I think for a conservative to reckon with that reality, that justice has not played out the way they would expect, not just in this one case, but in many cases over and over and over again, and that we do not know today, even after that situation, we do not know today, that legislator that I'm sitting in front of he does not know currently, he or she does not know currently, and he or she will not be able to find out where our state has procured those drugs from.
mm,
Despite all those issues, despite an almost 5-year moratorium, specifically around execution protocols and access to these drugs, they will not be able to find out where the state got those drugs. And that should be an issue for anyone, much less a conservative lawmaker in Oklahoma.
mm, agree. Demetrius.
Well, Adam said it so beautifully. I don't have much to add to that. I just simply say this: if this is a a policy that's being administered so effectively, then why the secrecy behind it? If this is something that lawmakers are so sure that citizens would support, why hide the details?
Mm,
There's a reason why the details are being hidden. It's because they don't want the people to be exposed. Because the more the people are educated about it and exposed to it, the more turned off they are by it.
I agree. You guys made some really valid points there. And I think you just educated a lot of people about the process. So, Adam, we're going to go to you. Oklahoma has had one of the most active execution schedules in recent years. What lessons do you think other states can learn from what you witnessed there? And what Oklahoma conservatives are doing to make the case for ending the use of the death penalty?
Yes, we have been unfortunately very active, and it was a strange set of circumstances that led to us beginning executions to begin with in 2021 as the moratorium came to an end. And it was agreed upon by a previous attorney general who resigned for personal reasons, but he said, I will not request execution dates until the litigation around federal execution protocols or state execution protocols at the federal level is resolved. So he said, I won't request execution dates. Once he resigned, the appointed attorney general, not elected by the people of Oklahoma,
Mm,
immediately requested execution dates for a number of individuals who had not selected their preferred alternative method of execution for religious reasons. And he said, for that reason, you're exempt as litigants to this lawsuit. You now have execution dates. It was a surprise to everybody involved in the system. It was not something that we had planned on. So we scheduled execution dates for individuals using execution protocols that were still being litigated as to whether or not they were constitutional. So it was unconscionable to even think that we were beginning that process at all. And so fortunately in Oklahoma, most everybody knew that it was an issue. It was something that we needed to talk about, whether you believed in capital punishment or not, especially legislators, they knew that it was an issue. So we have been fortunate to be able to have that conversation with the legislators from a beginning point of awareness. So over the last couple of years, we have engaged with legislators on the House and Senate side and asked essentially for a moratorium. We're not saying that you have to disagree with the death penalty or that you have to say you want executions to stop indefinitely. But we are saying you have to say how you want them to happen. So you can say, I believe in capital punishment, but I don't believe in the way we're doing it. You can hold on to both of those beliefs at the same time. And in Oklahoma, we've gained a lot of ground by approaching those conversations with grace, doing it in one-on-one settings where we're not trying to convince somebody or argue them into changing their minds. I mean, how many of us have ever changed our minds when someone's arguing with us? Very few of us.
Right.
So that approach has proved really beneficial here in Oklahoma, and we have had the long view in mind. We didn't get here in a year. It's going to take us a long time to change, and we somehow try to strike the balance between that long-term view and knowing that we have to do everything in our power to stop the very next execution. And that's the tension that we live in. So I think for those that are looking at what we're doing in Oklahoma, I think that's the approach that, to the extent that we have made progress here in Oklahoma, which I believe that we have, that's how we've gone about it.
Amazing. Before I say the last question, I just want to remind you guys that we do have the Q&A feature open. If you guys would like to drop some questions, I think we should have time to answer quite a few of them. So if you have any questions, don't forget to use the Q&A feature. My last question is going to be to Demetrius. You often speak about engaging younger conservatives. How do younger generations in the conservative movement view the death penalty differently than older ones?
Yeah, that's a great question. Um, in my experience, in my travels and my talks with students and with young adults that are part of the conservative movement and the pro-life activism, they see that correlation between being pro-life and being anti-death penalty. They see the need, how essential it is to have a consistent life ethic. And I think the more that young people are willing to do two things. Number one, to have the conversation amongst themselves and also amongst those who have paved the way for them to be involved in activism. That's going to change hearts and minds. And then number two, to take that education and to turn it into mobilization. So in other words, taking what they've received and putting it into action. And that could be by writing an op-ed, that can be by contacting their lawmaker or their representative, especially if they're in a state where we have an active campaign going. There are multiple ways to get involved. But what we are seeing right now, Jasmine, is young people are amplifying their voices for various causes across the country. It is young people that are making the difference in elections. It is young people that are taking upon this mantle of leadership, and they're making their voices heard. And they are, what I appreciate about this current generation is that they're letting it know that they are done with the status quo. They are done with things being done because of tradition and because that's the way they were taught.
Mhm.
We are in the midst of a generation that is skeptical, and that's good. It's good to have a healthy skepticism of things. And so, because of these trends, I'm of the persuasion that when our issue gets across the finish line, and I said this earlier, it's because of the young people who are involved in this post-Roe society that are so crucial to our issue being heard.
Mhm. No, I love that. I totally agree. Um, well, before we get into the Q&A, I'll just ask something really quick of you guys. Um, can either one of you guys answer this? What are conservatives doing to limit or end the death penalty or to address problems in particular cases? If you guys know anything off the top of your heads.
I can speak to what we're doing here in Oklahoma. That's actually been how we've engaged several lawmakers, is using specific cases. We use specific cases to highlight issues with the capital punishment system and make connections with what could very easily happen to someone they know or themselves. And I think that's part of what we're doing, but we're also a part of a coalition. So I think this is unique in Oklahoma, but something that we're seeing more and more often is coalitions of organizations focused on the death penalty, regardless of their political affiliation. So we've got an Oklahoma meeting that happens on a regular basis where everybody involved in work that is trying to end capital punishment gets together, and we talk about bigger picture, broader strategy. And then we also talk about individual specific cases and the advocacy that's happening around each one of those cases. So that is more recent. That started probably a little over 3 years ago. And that's been really beneficial for the work that we're doing here in Oklahoma.
Awesome. I love that. Demetrius, you want to add anything?
Absolutely. I'm really excited to answer this question. So we have movement that's happening in several states. And I'll begin with the state of Pennsylvania, where a Republican state representative is actually sponsoring a repeal bill, Representative Russ Diamond, and he came to oppose the death penalty because of his pro-life views. But in the question says particular cases, and this is what really stood out to me. He told me that he's filing a repeal bill because he witnessed what the DOJ did to President Trump in the previous years. And the consensus was, well, if the DOJ can go after the most powerful person on the planet, what can they do to ordinary citizens? And I thought that was a very unique perspective. We also have a repeal bill in Indiana led by Republican State Representative Bob Morris prior to September of 2024. That's just a year ago. Representative Bob Morris supported the death penalty. But like me, he sort of had this epiphany where he was on a pro-life journey and he wanted to be consistent with his views. And because of that, not only did he start opposing the death penalty, but he wanted to play an active role in making sure that that practice was ended. So he is sponsoring a repeal bill in Indiana. There's also a repeal bill in Ohio. And what do all these states have in common? Ohio, Indiana, and Pennsylvania. They're red states with Republican leadership. In Ohio, Republican Governor Mike DeWine has signaled that he would sign a repeal bill if it gets to his desk. And we do have a repeal bill in both chambers of the state legislature there, in the House and the Senate. In the state of Georgia, we just passed what is called HB 123 this past legislative session. And that is a bill that would exempt those with intellectual disabilities from facing a capital punishment sentence. And that had a Republican sponsor, and it passed unanimously out of the House and Senate. If memory serves me correct, I think only one person voted against it, and Republican Governor Brian Kemp signed it into law. All across the nation, we are seeing Republicans, conservatives opposing the death penalty. And while overall the death penalty is and should be a bipartisan issue, political reality tells us that in order to make capital punishment a thing of the past is going to take predominantly conservative support. And that's what we're seeing across the nation.
Awesome. Thank you both for sharing that. We're going to get into the Q&A. We still have a little time left. So this one will be for you, Adam. It's from Brandon Tucker. Any thoughts to the argument that a 10% error rate in capital cases isn't a sign of failure, but proof the system's safeguards are working?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it actually came up in an interim study that we did a little over 2 years ago here in Oklahoma. And that is the Oklahoma legislature's way of studying an issue and inviting public input into the legislative process. So they don't do that once the bill is actually being heard. They do it leading up to the legislative session. So you have a legislator that requests an interim study on a particular topic. You invite experts to come in and speak. And so we had a legislator who said essentially that I think that an error rate is okay. It actually proves that we are exonerating people and avoiding them actually being executed. So the first point is we have executed people who we later found out were innocent. So that has happened as recently in the last 5 years. So we still have to deal with the issue of whether or not you're okay with that. And if you are, ultimately, are you okay with being the person to be executed? Are you okay with that error rate? So you have to make it personal. Fortunately, and I think this is really important when you do this type of work, is to bring with you and come under the leadership of people who have lived experience with this issue. We were fortunate to have a gentleman with us who was actually exonerated from death row. And he somehow mustered the grace and composure to speak to this legislator and say, with all due respect, the years of my life that I spent on death row do not prove that this system works. and he works for an organization that represents people and works with people who have been exonerated from death row. And he said, the hundreds of years that innocent people have spent on death row are lost and gone forever. Those do not prove that this system works. And encouraged this legislator to consider how many years of his life he would be willing to give up and still call that the justice system working.
I agree. That's crazy. Katie says there are still executions occurring of people who have intellectual disabilities. How can that be stopped?
I would say I'm not sure what state Katie resides in, but I definitely would say um, Georgia is a good template to look at. They literally just passed the HB 123, the intellectual disabilities bill that I mentioned just a couple of minutes ago. And then also, Jasmine, if memory serves me correct, there was an ID bill that was passed and worked on in your state of Tennessee. So there are states that we can look at who have kind of tackled that issue that serve as a model for how similar legislation can be filed.
Yeah, and we actually did execute someone recently. Our last execution in Tennessee was a man with intellectual disabilities. Very complex. We don't have enough time for me to go into detail about it right now, but if you guys want to look into his case after this, his name is Byron Black. We will go to the next question. The United States stands an increasingly unsavory international company when it comes to maintaining the death penalty. But this fact tends not to resonate with many conservatives who default to a universal belief in American exceptionalism. Is it worth continuing with the argument that keeping the company with the likes of China and Saudi Arabia should be a point of shame?
I can answer that one or try to. I think it's maybe not the leading question, but I think it is certainly a point that we shouldn't shy away from just because it doesn't land well with everybody. I think it's important to think about the context that you're asking that question in. If it's argumentative and something that you are throwing in someone's face, then yeah, it may not be the best approach. But if it's a point in a nuanced conversation that you're having with somebody, then I do think that it can be helpful in highlighting where we stand internationally.
Okay, and then we have a question about Florida, where Demetrius lives. Florida has so many executions. How does Ron DeSantis experience an epiphany like those you have described? He signed so many death warrants.
So this reminds me of a question that was asked earlier in this segment regarding lawmakers that want to be tough on crime. And I would say that there has been outreach attempts on my behalf, on others' behalf, other conservatives' behalf in the state of Florida, to Governor DeSantis. And, I don't think it's a secret to anyone that the governor is kind of looking beyond the horizon for other political aspirations. But that outreach will continue. But he, along with others, are trying to wear the cloak of being tough on crime. But it's my hope and my counter argument that we need to be smart on crime.
I love it. Okay, that seems like the end of the questions that we have right now. Oh, hold on. There's one more. How can people unite around this issue across party lines? I think this is an issue that folks on both sides can agree on and really push.
Yeah, I can just highlight again the work that we're doing here in Oklahoma includes people from all across the political spectrum, and we have been really explicit about why that matters and also really clear about who we're going to follow on which issue and how we approach the issue. So we've been really clear, like, okay, this group is going to be the lead on our legislative efforts, or this group is going to be our lead on advocacy efforts. This group is going to be our lead on community organizing. and being really okay with the strengths and weaknesses of each organization and their reputation and their approach, but knowing that we can set aside a lot of things that we might disagree on to all get in the same room to talk about the one thing, or maybe one of many things, but the thing that we actually do really agree on, want to see change in Oklahoma.
Yeah, I think that's a great answer. And I also would piggyback and say that if you happen to live in a state that has the death penalty, um, more than likely we have a state partner, a state coalition partner there on the ground that's doing tremendous work that you can get involved in. If you live in a state that doesn't have the death penalty, number one, that's great. Number two, perhaps there's a neighboring state that has it where you can get involved in. Or again, there's multiple ways to make your voice heard. And then I do see this question that said if folks want to get more involved in this work as conservatives, what should they do? And this gives me a great opportunity to plug our website, and that is please go to www.conservativesconcern.org. There's a plethora of information there, and there are ways for you to sign up and get involved with us.
Yes, thank you. And also, you guys, if you'd like to sign up for our email list, you can sign up at tnconservativesconcerned.org. I look forward to seeing you guys again in the future and hosting more conversations. And again, thank you guys for joining us tonight. I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their evening.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Jasmine. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.